Cool. Well, thanks to everyone who's joining us today. Hopefully you're here to learn more about planning your 2021 content strategy, and we're going to teach you some things about that. We'll go over kind of what happened in 2020 and how that relates to our 2021 plans as we build out content strategies. We've got about 30 minutes to go over a lot of information, and hopefully we can cover all that. There's a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A, so as those come along, feel free to use the chat feature and send those our way, and we'll make space to cover those towards the end of the webinar. Today, I'm joined by Giselle Waters, our Associate Director of Content Strategy. She's been on the Madfish team for 4 years and in digital marketing almost twice as long. She heads up our content team building brilliant strategies. She also leads our B Corp initiatives, and she's super fun to work with. So thanks, Giselle, for joining us. I'm Sierra Sigelski, Client Success Manager at Madfish, often your first point of contact when you reach out to us. So if you have any questions after this webinar, feel free to reach out to me, or if you are interested in working with Madfish, you can email me directly. If you're meeting Madfish for the first time, we are a Portland-based digital marketing agency. We're focused on values. We're B Corp certified. We were certified in 2018. We're focused on being a business as a force for good and putting people before profits. We also ranked number 6 in Oregon's top 100 places to work. And we specialize in SEO, paid media, content marketing, and design. I'm going to go ahead and pass it on over to Giselle now, who's going to run through the agenda, what we're going to talk about today, and get us started.
Awesome. Thanks, Sierra. So hello, everyone. I am Giselle. As Sierra said, I lead our content team and social impact efforts here at Madfish Digital. And I'm super excited today to talk with you about what's been going on. I think there's a lot that we can learn from the data from this year, a lot of really exciting changes in terms of what consumers need and how it connects back to content. So we'll start by sort of doing a state of the sea, as we call it here at Madfish. That's how we start off any engagement, is really looking at how things are going right now and how we got here, what's happening in the consumer space, what are folks' needs, how are they changing. We'll talk about how consumers themselves have changed over the course of the past, 8-9 months that we've hit now. And then we'll talk about how to create your strategy for 2021, because I am a huge type A planner, and I know how hard it is to kind of go into each year without a really clear plan. So we'll talk about how to kind of build a more flexible, adaptable content strategy moving forward. As Sierra said, there will be time for a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to pop those questions into the chat as we go. I will try to keep an eye on that while presenting. So if you see me gazing off into the distance, it's me looking at your questions. And then we will just have some time at the end. I'm hoping this shouldn't take more than 20 minutes. So we should have a few minutes for questions right at the end. Awesome. I'm gonna hop into the meat of this presentation. So what is going on right now? In terms of a state of the sea, it's really no secret that 2020 has been a roller coaster of a year. Started off, with a casual set of potential pandemic. Maybe things are going a little bit weirdly. We knew this year was going to be weird due to the election. There's a lot going on. But for those of us in the United States, we've gone through an impeachment, a pandemic, rising white nationalism, economic instability, many natural disasters as a result of climate change, and a really contentious presidential election. A lot has been going on. And even, I would say, 2 of these things would have made for an intense year. I don't know if you actually want to raise your hand on Zoom, but I really feel like there has been this notion of us needing to pivot constantly this entire year. It's really felt like every time you put together a plan, something new comes out that is going to change that. And so, when we're thinking about how we're feeling this year, I think a lot of it does have to do with this notion of like never being sure and kind of feeling like the rug was being pulled out from under us constantly. And a kind of impact of that feeling of needing to pivot constantly is really a detractor for mental health. So nationwide, people are really suffering in a statistically significant way. I don't know how many of you guys have heard, or how many of you all have heard about Head and Water, which is this tool that actually measures the happiness and like sort of sentiment of folks on Twitter. Obviously not the end all be all of human experience on Twitter, but it is notable that Twitter has recorded a record level of sadness this year. And the saddest day of 2020 so far was May 31st. I think it's notable that that is the case based on kind of where things were at with the George Floyd protests starting, the Black Lives Matter movement, and really kind of the understanding that the pandemic was not going to go away in the summer. In addition, people's sentiment towards what was happening with the pandemic has really changed. So only 20% of consumers expected the pandemic to last longer than 6 months in March. By July, that number had risen to 66%, and an additional 20% expected it to last more than a year. So that's a pretty significant difference over the course of several months. And the impact on people's mental health has, of course, been pretty serious. Back in March, before most countries had entered a full lockdown, just a fifth of the consumers surveyed globally expected the coronavirus outbreak in their country to last longer than 6 months at all. I think it's really important as we're kind of moving into this phase of living with the pandemic and living with kind of the state of unrest that we're in to really understand what the consumer mindset is like. That's going to be really key in identifying how things have changed and how things are going to change over the course of the next year. I think we would be remiss to think that, you know, people are maybe behaving differently online now and are going to go back to quote unquote normal. I think we really have to think about what are the permanent changes in people's lives due to the pandemic. So what is on the minds of today's US consumers? Ethical business is a really big focus that we've seen growing. We do a lot of data research at Madfish, and I pay really close attention to kind of how consumer changes are happening. And folks are really starting to get invested in, you know, not just the product, but the business and people behind it. So it's less important. The product is obviously still important, but it's just as important to think about, like, who are the folks behind it? How are they behaving with their employees? And how are they taking care of the world? People are also still really worried about the virus. That has not become less of a threat. And I will say that, of course, you know, we're seeing rising cases everywhere right now. And so I wouldn't expect that that will go down anytime soon, even with the promise of a vaccine. What's really important to think about with the virus, and something that I found striking looking at the data, was the fact that folks are actually more worried about the pandemic than terrorism, which is really the first time that has happened in the United States in quite a long time. Also, health has become more of a key priority, which is, you know, something that we might expect, but something that we should be thinking about as we're sort of imagining how to reach out to consumers. So with a global pandemic and the rise in home fitness and healthy eating, they really want to ensure that they're well and that they're well over time. Those are habits that I wouldn't anticipate going away. So how do we connect the content to your consumers' values, especially as they've changed? How does your audience really relate to, you know, not just your product, but your brand, what's happening in current events, where is their mind at? And then pop culture and trends too. We've become all slightly more online creatures than maybe we wanted to be. And that means that we are more likely to be focusing on trends and what's happening online, what happened on social media, or even just what's happening in the news. I think as a downloader of the New York Times app, I definitely feel like I spend a lot of time refreshing things and just thinking about the way that people are interacting with pop culture. So I think it's really important at this point as we're moving forward, and especially in 2021 and beyond. This is something I feel like I've been preaching about for a few years, but has become even more important in 2020 and in 2021, is to go beyond your product. So even before the pandemic, audiences were starting to take a much more holistic look at businesses that they support. They're really voting with their dollars and defining themselves by the brands they buy. You know, you see that with folks who are like, oh, I would only buy an Apple computer, or I'm an iPhone person. but we're seeing that even more with ethical business. Fast fashion is a great example, how folks are moving away from that and are really looking towards products that say something about them. So think about your company practices. What is your representation like, both in your advertising as well as actually on your teams? And then how are you giving back? What are the causes that matter to you and your customers? So we're going to talk about creating an adaptable strategy. And in my mind, an adaptable strategy, it doesn't mean that you're going to put together this strategy and be able and have to change it necessarily every month or so, but it does mean that you're going to be thinking first about your values and your consumer values, and then you're going to be building out where are the places that I can connect with them, what are the types of content pieces that are going to resonate, what is the story that I want to tell about 2021 in my product. And then we'll be talking about tactics for you to stay on top of that, because the fact is, as much as I love making a 6-month roadmap and a 1-month social media calendar, that may just not be possible in 2021. And I think we have to be ready to accept that, even as my planner heart cries. So that's how it is. So keeping calm and staying precedented in 2021, what does that look like? We have 50 days until 2021. So if you want to just take a moment to have a heart attack, that was me writing this presentation. And planning your content for the next year just might not be possible. However, I have 4 Ps for you to help you create that strategy that evolves with the times and your audience. So let's hop into that. So the first piece of this is pillars. I feel like most folks who've worked with content strategies understand that pillars are really important. However, your pillars for this year may be really different than what you've used in the past. A lot of the time, pillars, when we're coming up with them, are more around the product itself and how it solves a problem. And I think it's important this year to think about what are the things that both you and your audience care about. That Venn diagram is what you want to be focusing your content on in the course of the next year, because there's going to be a lot of noise and people really do need to be getting content that resonates with them. So take some time to write out your company values, product launches, and potential pillars for the next year. So just thinking about, like, what are the products that you're going to be putting out next year? If you're a software as a service company, or if you are, more consumer goods, what are those things that you want to be putting out? Who are you trying to reach? And then what do you expect your audience to be interested in? So finding those places where you are excited about and your audience is excited about, that's kind of that Venn diagram that you want to be hitting. Now, planning, is it a misnomer? Maybe in 2021, but using those themes and topics, you'll want to start to build out your content calendar. And now is really a great time to ensure you have buy-in from your creative and strategy teams, as well as your agency if you do work with one. So thinking about how can you get everyone together to talk about these topics and themes, and then use those themes to guide your overall strategy. So thinking about what are your goals, and then working backwards towards those themes. What are the things that you need to be talking about? How are you going to engage folks? And that'll also help you decide which trends and sort of like more newsy items you might want to incorporate throughout the year. How much space do you want to give yourself each month for incorporating like new and emerging trends and topics? I think it's really good as you're building this out, just noting the year we've had and noting the year we'll likely have, is making sure that you do have, at least, I would say, a minimum of 15% of your time that you're planning towards your strategy for sort of newsier items or things that are coming up last minute. And I think that that's still pretty conservative. So definitely make sure that you're really allocating your resources as best you can so that you're working smarter, not harder. And you have that time each month to adapt without feeling like it's an additional thing on your strategy. A great way to do this is using macro content and micro content. This is something that we talk about a lot at Madfish Digital and is a really important component of any sort of strategy overall, whether that's content or go-to-market or just lead generation, whatever it is. You want to be thinking about your macro content pieces. So that could be anything from a blog to a podcast to a longer explainer video. And then from each of those macro content pieces, I would recommend, potentially doing 1 to 2 macro content pieces per month, and then scaling those out into micro content. So that could be as simple as taking a paragraph from a blog post and turning that into an Instagram. Or it could be saying like, okay, I have this podcast clip and I have like 3 key ideas that are coming out of the podcast. I want to reach new folks. Maybe I'm going to create a TikTok about this and like kind of pull out the really salient bits of conversation to get folks to go in. And that can also be testimonials, emails, whatever it is, but just really thinking about how to use content in multiple ways, because otherwise you are going to get exhausted if you're like, oh, like I have a blog coming out and now I also want to do a TikTok video. Try to combine those topics as much as possible so that you're not constantly having to add more creativity to your day when you may be still feeling drained. Just me positing what things might be like next year, even as we turn a corner. Then it gets to the execution, AKA produce. The most important thing you can do for yourself now for next year is to execute month 1 through 3. So I just think when we are looking at what is potentially going to be a very busy year, it's really great if you can get ahead now. So taking that time over the course of, the next 2 to 3 weeks to say, okay, like for sure, what are the themes that I want to be focusing on? What are the first pieces of macro content that align with my business's needs? And then taking the time to produce those now, that will make January so much easier for you. And I know that I've said this a million times, but I am a big planner. And I think that, once you've got that plan in place, it's really important to get to that execution phase and not let yourself get kind of like too wrapped up in all of the details and gathering all of the information. Done is better than perfect. So make sure that you're taking that time to actually get the work done. If you can only plan the first quarter and then get the first month done before the end of the year, you're just going to be in a much better place to hit the ground running in the new year. Depending on your workload, your team capacity, and your industry, you may not be able to do everything. That is okay. Now is the time to really activate your team and get ahead if you can. I think delegation and bringing in folks who might not traditionally be on the marketing team is also a good opportunity this year. Are there sales folks who can help you, kind of figure out what your value propositions are? Can they help inform the content for the first month? Can you speak with, customer service representatives about what stories they're hearing from clients? Can you reach out to, current customers? What are the things that they want? Can they help identify those themes for you so that you're not necessarily having to do all the information gathering? I really recommend thinking about ways to employ different tools to gather that information, especially if you can get it written down or recorded. So highly recommend Google Forms or Zoom calls. I would not say, I am not necessarily a market researcher, but it's really great if you can get 6 customers or 6 sales folks or 6 members of a team onto a call and just get some information from them. Take the time to record that and then transcribe it. That way you've got all that information in one place and you're able to use it for that content later on. Load up your project management tool. We personally use Asana, but whatever you use, make sure that your tasks are in there for that first 3 months. And then activating your creative team for large deliverables. So here at Madfish Digital, we do tend to work with our design team to get a lot of our content done. That's a big, important part of it. But we also work with our paid media team. So really talking about campaigns. How is this going to launch? Who are we going to reach and at what time? And then make a plan for last minute requests and trending content. So like I said earlier, I think it is really important to be allowing yourself that space, but maybe coming up with a plan of like, okay, if we see a trend we like, what are the types of pieces that we might want to put out? Is it a short blog? Is it a video? Is it, an Instagram story? Whatever it is, think about kind of like the placements and the way that you would employ that strategy. Even if you just have a quick process that's, assigning like who is on the lookout for trends, who do they tell, and how do you get them, how do you take a trend from idea to an actual produced piece of micro content? So this is where I tell you where to get a lot of information. I think that tools, resources, all of those things, they are your superpower. They're how you scale. No one person can keep an eye on everything at once. And so scalability will really be key in the next year. You want to automate as much as possible. And your content marketing strategy really does need to be, humming. It needs to be organized. You don't want to be constantly going back and be like, oh, what were we going to focus on this month? What was the theme? What do customers care about? What's the next product launch? You really want that to all be mapped out already. So I suggest using Asana, Trello, Monday. I could name 1,000 project management tools, whatever works best for you, to keep yourself organized in terms of what your projects are over the upcoming year. I suggest using something like Google Trends for search trends over time. If you're an SEO focused business, which all of us should be, because it's a great free way to get customers onto our websites. Global Web Index, that is what I use for a lot of these cool stats that I was sharing with you earlier in this webinar. They do really great market research. And while we use a paid plan to create custom reports, they also have really great search trends on their blog. So I suggest checking those out and kind of seeing how things have changed over time. They're a great resource. Quora is something that I feel like is super underutilized in the content marketing space. People ask wild questions on Quora and Reddit. And so looking at those as content opportunities in your industry, if there are active subreddits, and then thinking about kind of like ancillary areas, it's also a nice place to find potential trends. So thinking about kind of Quora, Reddit, potentially Instagram if you're looking at hashtags, but I do think that that's a little harder in terms of research. And then TikTok. So I feel like I am 1,000 years old on TikTok. However, it is a really great place to see where trends are happening, and as well as sort of seeing them before they happen. We look at so many trends that have now hit other places. For instance, Instagram Reels, in terms of like format, but a lot of the content things that we see on other platforms started on TikTok. Very similar to Vine, as I'm sure most of you know, but just thinking about the fact that there are these places where we can kind of see trends originate, and that's a good opportunity to see what people are talking about. I will also say for those folks who do work for brands that are in industries that they maybe are thinking like, there's no way anyone's talking about that on TikTok. There are copywriters on TikTok. There are ad agency folks on TikTok. There are folks who are talking about product launches. There's software as a service. There's how to write your resume. There's a ton of folks on TikTok who are older, who are in the professional field, who have buying power. Not to mention turning Gen Z and millennial users into sort of brand evangelists. So really do take the time to look at TikTok. I cannot emphasize that enough for any brand. Especially because the algorithm is, I don't know how many of you have used TikTok, but the algorithm is simply wild and learns what you like almost immediately. I never said that I liked agencies or worked at an agency, and yet TikTok started showing me agency videos. I don't really even want to know how they know, but that's something to think about just in terms of organic targeting is really where it's at. Finally, I will tell you the thing that nobody wants to hear, but that you are still going to have to pivot. So leave space in your content calendar for those inevitable pivots and additions. Do not fill up everything. If there's anything we've learned from 2020, I think it's that the best laid plans cannot really survive in our new normal. And using placeholders for at least one piece of macro content per quarter and a few pieces of micro content per week will let you really have space in your calendar. And this way you'll also be able to stay on top of trends, adapt to industry changes, and speak to the needs of your customers in real time. So trying not to create this like by rote strategy that's going to feel like you talking about what you want to talk about, and instead letting it be a true conversation between you and your consumers. So that is me running through 1,000 things. And I see that Todd has a question about TikTok. So Todd asked, do you feel TikTok is viable for B2B? So I will say yes. I think that TikTok totally is viable for B2B. I think that it is more complicated. So it is thinking about like, how do you want to use it? And like, what are the questions? If I would say for especially software as a service, if you're able to kind of demonstrate that on TikTok, how is it useful, then that's great. I will also say that TikTok is a great place to be funny, which is something that doesn't come natural to everyone. But I think that everyone likes to laugh. And so if there's a way to kind of make a joke out of it, I see a lot of content on TikTok about sort of like work from home culture or meetings or, you know, how to get stuff done. I also see stuff that's really productivity focused. Like, here's how I write my to-do list, or here's my morning routine. There are lots of ways that you could potentially build like a lot of brand affinity on TikTok, from anything like showing the features and how it helps you get more done to like actually having your employees do like mini daily vlogs of like, here's my morning working for XYZ company. So it's definitely, I think it does require a little bit more creativity, but I think it could have really big results. And we're still in that early phase. I think that if we look back to how every social media network has launched, they all had a TikTok phase, I would say, where people were like, there's no way I'm ever gonna like need to have a following here. I guess Snapchat aside, that just has never been true. And even Snapchat, I am not of the generation that uses Snapchat regularly, but it sure seems like all these TikTok teens are. And so that's something to think about in the future as well. Other questions? It's fine if you don't have other questions too. Oh gosh, personal branding. So Todd asked, do you feel like personal branding is better now versus business branding? I feel like this is such a non-answer, but I think that both are really important. I think that in terms of your priorities as a business owner, I would really focus on trying to develop like your brand's strategy first, and then seeing how the members of your team can actually speak to like each individual asset. So for instance, I would say with like a team member who is focused on, say you have your brand, you have your content pillars, and you have your different team members, having them kind of employ different content strategies around different areas of your business could be good. So for instance, at Madfish, we do tend to have our data analytics and paid media team talk a little bit more about paid media on LinkedIn and in their personal brands. Whereas as anyone who follows me on LinkedIn knows, half of what I talk about is B Corp, and that's genuine passion as well as what I focus on in the business. So just making sure that everything feels authentic. Nina, what would you need to include in / focus on in the first 3 months in Asana for project management? So I will tell you what we do at Madfish, which is that we look at kind of our content calendar. So we'll build that out, say in a spreadsheet or in a Google Doc, where we're saying like, these are our themes and these are the content pieces we want to put out. And then we take that and we actually put that into Asana and put in kind of our due dates. I would say that if you are planning for those first 3 months, I would at least decide on, what are, if you're doing 2 macro content pieces, what are those 5 pieces of macro content, leaving that 1 extra, like I said, for, whatever trend may come up. And then putting together kind of what is your idea for how many pieces of micro content you're going to be able to put together. I think for solopreneurs or folks who have slightly fewer people on the staff, being really realistic about your time is important. So don't overburden yourself, and then just figure out what level of like micro detail you need to go into for you to have that project management work. That's also, if you are working with someone else, having them with you. Great. That makes perfect sense, Nina, just so you know. Bringing your business onto the social world and figuring out the content is super hard. And I think that it's good to just kind of be thinking as you're putting that together, like, where do you want to be? Where is your audience? And then like, where do those ideas intersect? Katie, my company is starting a webinar series. Any tips on where to start? Oh gosh. So Madfish has been doing webinars now, since June. Sierra, I might not be totally sure on that, but we started them out just because it was a big interest of ours. And to be honest, Sierra and Ben, our CEO, were big drivers of this. And I think that the first place to start is really to make sure that you have folks who are going to do the webinars, who are the individuals who you're going to tap to have those conversations. And then I would say, however long you think it's going to take to prep for that webinar, double that, because getting all of sort of the pieces and parts organized can be challenging. We have a whole process that I will I now see that I need to write a blog post about. But we have a whole process that we use where we start off by kind of talking about the topic, making sure that we have the person engaged and that they know what they're going to speak to, that we feel like it's going to really align with our business goals. And then we will actually go forward and say like, okay, we need to have an outline of the webinar. We need to have a landing page. We need to have the email sort of that you've been receiving from Sierra this whole time about the upcoming webinar. We need to have what are the post-webinar activities as well. So you all will of course get this recording, but then as I'm putting together potentially like a checklist for what to do for your content strategy in 2021, I'll also make sure that everyone gets that. That kind of has to get talked about. And then in terms of getting people just engaged and excited about webinars, I would really recommend doing like internal practice. Here at Madfish, we do Wednesday presentations. So every Wednesday, our entire team meets and kind of talks through what's happening with whichever industry or team we're on. And so giving people the opportunity to practice internally would be also a recommendation.
And then one other thing to add, thanks Giselle for that. You had mentioned this earlier, but done is better than perfect. You know, we're all kind of learning this when we start, but getting started is the practice, and we're on our 4th webinar now. So as we continue to move through, it gets better and easier, and we iron out all those details. So just getting started is an important way to get started.
Awesome. Any other questions before we hop off here? I really appreciate all of your time today, and just thank you so much for your attention. I know that this is, like I said, a really wild year. And so any space that you're willing to give us is something that we really appreciate and treasure. So thank you so much.
And thanks to Giselle for bringing all of this information to us.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, Sierra. Awesome. Well, with that, we will hop off. As always, feel free to reach out to us via email or on social media. You can email me at gisellew@madfishdigital.com or Sierra at sierrac@madfishdigital.com. Please follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram if you want to see the work that we're doing. I like how I don't have a TikTok for us, but I am working on it for 2021. And then, yeah, just feel free to reach out if you have any questions or want to connect. Awesome. Bye, y'all.